Allahu Akbar, 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 Allahu Akbar. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. Before I begin, a quick reminder for those who have not yet prayed the Eid Salah. Because this is a virtual khutbah, it doesn't stand in place of the khutbah itself. The Eid prayer can be prayed alone or with the family in your house, and I would recommend you pray it. And we sent the instructions yesterday, alhamdulillah. So follow those instructions of how to conduct the Eid Salah in your home, and inshallah you'll be able to seek the blessings in that way. But before praying the Eid Salah, it's important that you pay your Zakat al-Fitr. And Zakat al-Fitr is an obligation for every living person. So even the newborn child, you have to pay Zakat al-Fitr on them. You can do so through our app or through any other means, inshallah, but it must be paid before you do the Salah, inshallah. Because this is a khutbah in place of, or trying to take the place of, the actual thing, unfortunately it doesn't fill the conditions. So it's symbolic in that gesture. And Allah says, وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Whoever magnifies the symbols of Allah, the things which we typically take as remembering Allah, if you glorify them, and what we're doing here is glorifying them by putting in place something that is similar to it in its absence, in the hope that Allah gives us its reward, then inshallah you will be given that reward. Allah says in the Quran, الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم. Shaitan threatens you with the prospect of poverty and commands you to foul deeds. And God promises you forgiveness and His abundance. God is limitless and all-knowing. When we hear this ayah, we see an interesting paradox that Allah places, a dichotomy between two realities. Shaitan, in his nature, makes you worry. He makes you feel pessimistic. He makes you feel like everything is doom and gloom. Whilst Allah Azza wa Jal promises you optimism, He gives you hope. He makes you look forward to what's to come and tells you, as a matter of fact, وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, that the final affairs, the outcome will go towards those who are righteous. But in the verse, it doesn't just simply allude to optimism and pessimism, but Allah connects optimism to good deeds and abundance and forgiveness. Whilst Shaitan's pessimism and his direction towards negativity is connected to foul deeds, to sin. We see that Allah Azza wa Jal, when He's talking about optimism and being optimistic, is intrinsically connected to being a good person. And pessimism and negativity is intrinsically leading towards that which is bad. In that we take perhaps what is one of the greatest signs of our faith. A sign that, inshaAllah, by being hopeful of Allah, and by being optimistic in all that we do, we will see the reality of our affairs. Let me take you to an incident that happened in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Now I want you to imagine yourself in the trenches with the Prophet ﷺ, amidst an incredibly intense pressure. 10,000 people, an army the like of which Arabia has never seen before, has mobilized with people coming from across Arabia, as well as enemies from within, both in terms of the hypocrites and the Jewish tribe that had aligned themselves with the disbelievers at the time. Such an incredible amount of pressure, the believers were inspired by the words of Salman al-Farsi to build a trench around the city of Medina. Now imagine yourself in those trenches, as you're digging as fast as you can in life or death situations, you could in that moment feel an incredible sense of negativity. Why is Allah doing this to the Ummah? After years and years of oppression, after we finally got our own city, our own place to practice our faith, there's just more and more coming. The ties just don't seem to stop. But it's in that scenario that perhaps the greatest display of optimism was shown. After seeing a boulder, which symbolizes the immovable realities that you may feel are there, a huge rock that all of the people tried to remove. The Ansar tried to break it, it wouldn't break. The Muhajirin tried to break it, they couldn't break it. So who did they call? They called the best of creation, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They called the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just like when we face incredible difficulties and incredible trials, we call upon Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And just like this immovable object, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and he struck it the first time, and a light shone, filling the horizon. Symbolism like this is almost as if we're living today. An immovable object, an unknown reality in future, but through Allah and His Messenger, we will see this light fill the horizon. He struck it a second time, another light filled the horizon. The Sahaba this time completely awestruck with what they're witnessing. And the Prophet ﷺ struck it a third time and the rock broke as if it was sand and completely disappeared. The Sahaba inquired upon the Prophet ﷺ, what did you just do? What was this thing? What were these lights? And he said, when he hit the rock the first time, he saw the palaces of Kisra in Persia lit before him, promising him the palaces of the future, the success, the victory. Now remember the scenario that they're in. They're in probably one of the most difficult battles they will ever have faced. The culmination of years and years of enmity, of their people wanting to destroy them, people from within trying to destroy them. In a moment that would almost justifiably allow you to feel negative, the Prophet ﷺ was promising something so extreme, something so indulgent, people would not even have thought that they would be in the palaces of one of the greatest empires at that time, a 3,000-year-old empire. But yet the Prophet ﷺ's optimism and his promise from Allah Azza wa Jal was constant even in the most difficult of places. The second light, as if the first is not enough, the second, he says, he's shown the palaces or the cities of Caesar in Syria. And the third strike showed him the cities of Ethiopia. Allah was showing him in the most difficult of moments the promise of where Islam is to come. The Prophet ﷺ never lived to see Islam entering these places, but his certainty in that truth extended into the hearts of the companions. And within the lifespan of Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, we witnessed these great empires fall. Optimism and being optimistic is a prophetic sunnah. It's something that in the most difficult of times, in an occasion when every other time you'll be sad and other people feeling upset, you have to be happy. You have to be rejoiceful and looking towards the positivity in the situation. We faced a Ramadan like no other. A Ramadan alone in our homes where we could not go to the mosques. And yet Allah placed the beauty and the love and the spirituality in our hearts in that Ramadan. And just like He promised He would do that for Ramadan, He will place the happiness inside your heart during this Eid. An Eid where we're unable to visit our family and friends. Optimism is a prophetic sunnah. And Allah Azza wa Jal ties optimism to the performance of good. In another hadith, Adi ibn Hatim, a famous companion of the Prophet ﷺ, came to him and a man came whilst he was with him and he complained to the Prophet ﷺ. Complaining is the sign of negativity. Something that many of us can face and feel during these difficult times. He complained to the Prophet ﷺ of poverty and destitution. Another man complained of people being robberies and highwaymen. How did the Prophet ﷺ respond? He said, and turned to Adi, he said, if you shall live long enough, you will witness a time where a lady can travel from Hawda all the way to Mecca and perform the tawaf around the Kaaba, fearing nothing except Allah and the wolves that will eat its sheep, or her sheep. When people complained to him, he met that with optimism. He met that with hope of what is to come, of what is there in the future. When someone said, but what about the robbers of the tribe of Ta'i? And they've spread evil across the country. What about the oppression we're seeing in this place and the oppression we're seeing in this place? How relatable is this hadith in our current time? What about what will happen post-lockdown? What will happen after this, after this? The Prophet ﷺ responded again, if you shall live long enough, you will see the treasures of Kisra will be opened up to you. And people will be carrying a handful of gold and silver, and they will go out looking for people to give the money because there is so much wealth. The Prophet ﷺ, whenever met with negativity, he confronted it with positivity. Whenever people felt down, he would meet it with happiness. And such is the prophetic sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said he liked optimism. In the Arabic it says, يُعْجِبُهُ الْفَأْلُ وَيُكْرِهُ الطَّيْرَ. The Prophet ﷺ used to, people translate this as good omens, but a more befitting translation is he liked optimism, things that indicate positivity, good things for the future. Don't focus on the negative aspects. Don't focus on that which can indicate to bad, but focus on that which will open up tremendous bounty and pleasure and happiness from Allah Azza wa Jal. Things which will indicate to you that you should and you will be happy in the future. In the story of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, a story revealed at perhaps the pinnacle of the difficulties of the Prophet ﷺ after losing both his uncle and his wife during the time of what we call Am al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. That Allah Azza wa Jal in His wisdom revealed a surah to the Prophet ﷺ of a previous prophet named Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. A story that has become infamous amongst all of Muslims because of the series of events that befell upon our beloved Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, from being thrown away into a well by his brothers, to being taken as a slave and sold, to being put into or being enticed by the wife of his owner, to being put into prison for several years, to ending up being the prince of Egypt, or the treasurer of Egypt. Such a sequence of events can make you feel negative. Why is Allah doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? Why did I fail my exam? Why are we stuck indoors for Eid? Why is this? Why is that? But Yusuf alayhi salam knew the positive outlook in the future. He saw in his dream as a child 11 planets prostrating to him, and the sun and the moon. And he had trust in Allah's promise that he will, despite the turn of events happening to him, he will trust in Allah, and Allah will not be oppressive. So how do we turn ourselves to be optimistic? How do we adopt optimism into our life and change the outlook in which we see the world? The Prophet ﷺ narrates a hadith Qudsi, a hadith of the words of Allah Azza wa Jal, where he says a hadith that many of you would have heard before. Allah Azza wa Jal says, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنَّ عَبْدِي بِي وَأَنَا مَعَهُ إِذْ ذَكَرَنِي. I am as my slave thinks of me. I am with him when he mentions me. If he mentions me to himself, I mention him to myself. If he mentions me in an assembly, I mention him in an assembly greater than him. If he draws near to me with a handspan, I draw near to him with an arm's length. And if he comes walking to me, I come running to him. This hadith is about optimism. It's about positive thinking about Allah Azza wa Jal. And from it we can derive 3 steps that Allah Azza wa Jal lays out within the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ of how we can adopt such a mentality. The first is to think well of Allah, to recall and to be optimistic about what you assume Allah and His affairs to be for you. If you assume it to be bad, it will be bad. And if you assume it to be good, it will be good. So the first is to adopt and to always remind yourself to be positive about the decree of Allah. The second is language, the words which we choose. Allah mentions, not without coincidence, فَإِن ذَكَرَنِي, if He mentions me, if He speaks to me, if He recalls me. Because the words in which you use, and we will go into examples of this, reflect deeply the mindset in which you have. And then finally is to take action, to witness, to rebalance the difficulties with ease, to begin to actively combat the negativity with positivity. Just as we saw in the stories of the Prophet ﷺ, where people came to him with negativity, he actively painted an image of positivity. So, the first is to think well of Allah. Have that ingrained nature that you know Allah will be good for you. And the second is use the correct words and the language in order to reflect what's good for you. And then finally, witness that Allah will rebalance things, and be clear that in your actions of how you wish to do that. Allah says in another hadith, Qudsi, I have forbidden oppression for myself. I have forbidden oppression for myself. Allah in all the things He does to you, if you've lost a loved one, if you failed an exam, if you are cut off from your family, if you've lost your job, whatever it is that is happening to you, Allah is not oppressing you. Allah is not doing this in order to harm you or to hurt you out of some sadism or some malice towards you. But rather Allah says, if you are astray, then only He can guide you. And if you are hungry, then only He can feed you. And if you are naked, then only He can clothe you. The hadith is extremely long, but the essence of it, He continues to say, if all of humanity were to gather together with the jinn and all of creation to benefit Allah, even in the smallest amount, they would not increase Him in even the most incremental amount. And if all of the humans, the jinn and creation were to gather together to harm Allah, they would not harm Him, even by the smallest amount. Allah has no need to harm us. But Allah has created a world which is there to test us. And in the intricate web of creation, where our free choices are intermingled with other people's, He's created a set of laws. And those laws impact one another. That's why in Islam it's so essential that we adopt the mentality of calling people to good and forbidding the evil. Because our decisions are not our decisions. They are, or my decisions rather, are not my decisions. They are our decisions. They impact one another. So for us to take a step towards correcting other people and making things better, it's naturally fixing the system of the world. Allah finishes the hadith, He says, so let him who finds good praise Allah, and let him who finds other than that blame no one but himself. Shaykh Hamza, when I heard him talking about this hadith, mentioned something profound. He said that a person who sees the beauty, this hadith is talking entirely about perspective. Allah only gives you good. But it's whether you have the ability to see that thing as good or not. Allah just says in the Quran, أَوَلَمَّا أَصَابَتْكُم مُّصِيبَةٌ قَدْ أَصَبْتُم مِّثْلَيْهَا قُلْتُمْ أَنَّ هَذَا قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Why is it when you suffered casualties, it's talking about the Battle of Uhud, although you had made your enemy suffer twice as much as that, talking about positivity, you protested, how could this be? Say, O Prophet, it's because of your disobedience. Or rather, another translation, قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ, it's from your own selves, it's from your own perspectives. Surely Allah is most capable of all things. What greater calamity could befall us than the Prophet ﷺ being damaged and being hurt at the hands of those fighting him? But Allah Azza wa Jal, even in this verse, when talking about how they were struck with this tribulation and this difficulty, Allah Azza wa Jal describes how reflect on the positive elements. Reflect how even in that circumstance you've done double what they've done to you. And then he says, if you're unable to do that, قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ, it's from your own selves, your own inability to perceive what's good. The first step for us to do is to reflect and to understand that anything that happens to us is from Allah. And anything that is from Allah is good. And if we are unable to see that good, then that's our deficiency. Whether it is intrinsically good, things are not necessarily intrinsically good. Illness and disease and death are sad things and difficult things. But as the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, the eye will tear and the heart will feel sad. But we don't question the qadr of Allah. We don't question the wisdom of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because whilst this might be a difficult thing to bear, on balance, in the future, you will know it's a good thing for us. So when we see these difficult times, and when we witness these difficult occasions, let us remember that Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't do anything except that it's good for us. And that is indeed the first step towards adopting a positive mentality. The second is you must use the correct language. You must use the words that are befitting to the scenario to reflect the inner meaning. As a simple example, people often talk about the laws of Allah Azza wa Jal. The rules, the do's and don'ts of Islam. You can do this, you can't do this. As a very simple switch, and actually probably a positive and more reflective meaning and understanding of what it is. Rather than seeing it as the laws of Allah, see it as the guidance of Allah. Rather than seeing that Allah Azza wa Jal is telling you, don't do this, and I'll punish you. See it as Allah's pointing to you towards saying, if you do this, you'll be harming yourself. And rather than saying, do this because you must, it's obliged, see it as Allah saying, if you do this, it will be good for you. If we change the word from law to guidance, we'll begin to notice the impact of the positivity. We'll begin to notice the change in which we have. Wouldn't it be unfair if Allah has just sent us to this world, asking us to obey Him, but gave us no guidance? Isn't that a much more positive way to understand the rules and regulations that Allah gives us, rather than seeing it as a series of do's and don'ts which are difficult for us? When we focus and we turn the language to reflect the reality, it naturally makes us more optimistic. How much easier is it to follow guidance when someone is there to care for you and look after you than it is to follow a law, something that's strict and harsh upon you? The Prophet ﷺ says, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut." Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, then let him say good or stay silent. There's no place for negativity. Allow yourself to only manifest that which is good. Because what you speak in your tongue will help make your reality inside more positive. They did a study on those who were compared to, in terms of the environment. They asked them, on one side, they gave them all the negative aspects. They called it the carbon footprint. Looking at all the different negative ways in which they're impacting the world, filling them with dread and difficulty of all this harm that they're doing. And for another group, they looked into what they call the carbon handprint. All the positive things, the little changes, the practical elements that you can do to change and to improve the world. They found those who were given positivity were far more adherent in changing their way of living than those who were just fed with negativity. Be optimistic and be positive and only speak that which is good. It will help not just you, but all those around you. And then finally, recall the blessings of Allah.
Allow yourselves to rebalance the details and the realities with which Allah has given you. Allah says in the Quran, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you were to count the blessings of Allah, you would never be able to count them. Make a list after this of all the blessings. See it as a challenge of how many blessings Allah has given you. Allah doesn't say this of difficulties. He doesn't say this of trials. He only mentions this of the positive tests. But you have to know that this is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. In Surah Shura, Musa alayhi salam, when he first met Allah Azza wa Jal, he says, وَإِذْ نَادَى رَبُّكَ مُوسَى أَنِ ائْتِ الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ قَوْمَ فِرْعَوْنَ أَلَا يَتَّقُونَ قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُكَذِّبُونَ. So Allah Azza wa Jal tells Musa alayhi salam to go and meet the people and confront the people. Musa alayhi salam complains to Allah, as we allowed to and in fact encouraged to. Whilst we can't complain to people, we can complain to Allah. Because Allah loves to hear these things and He loves people to call upon Him in order to answer it. So when Musa alayhi salam speaks his difficulties that he has inside him, Allah just says in the end, قَالَ كَلَّا فَاذْهَبَا بِآيَاتِنَا إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ مُسْتَمِعُونَ. Allah just says, وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. So, in the beginning of the story, Musa alayhi salam feels a tremendous sense of dread, of fear, and he's complaining to Allah about that feeling. After a few verses, as he proceeds through the story, as Musa alayhi salam takes his people and is confronted in front of the Red Sea, behind him is the army of Pharaoh, in what seems like an impossible situation, and all the people around him are saying to him, what's going to happen? You've led us to our destruction. Allah reveals that the Prophet Musa alayhi salam says, كَلَّا إِنَّ مَعِيَ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينَ. In that moment, he realizes and he knows that Allah Azza wa Jal is with him. In the most impossible situation, he's been trained with time to know that Allah Azza wa Jal will save him. Optimism is something that you adopt actively, and with time you get better at it. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to lose hope. But allow yourself in that moment to take a step back and gain some perspective. And think about all the negative things that happened to you in the past and how they worked out okay. About all the difficulties you faced and how they ended up being good for you. Think about how Allah Azza wa Jal planned a course of affairs for you in life. And things in their difficulties, whenever you turn to Allah, always worked out better. So we leave you today with a sense of optimism. A sense of advice that tells us, be optimistic, be happy. This is the day of Eid. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that on this day, Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed that all of us will be happy. Allah Azza wa Jal has placed the happiness in the heart as a reward of Ramadan. So be optimistic. Be happy. And the 3 steps to do so is number 1, know that Allah Azza wa Jal only ever wants good for you. Number 2 is recall all the different moments and the pleasures that Allah Azza wa Jal has given you in the past that make you feel positive. And number 3, use the right words in order to reflect what's reality. Because words express what is that inside. قولي قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم السلام عليكم. الله أكبر 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 إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. Alhamdulillah, this is the day of Eid, and of course it's important we adhere to the necessary guidance for our own safety and protecting our own families. Even if people are doing other than what's been advised, and people are doing something which is going out into the parks and the beaches and so on, it's not necessary for us to also harm ourselves. So inshallah, make sure you adhere to that positivity. And inshallah, make sure you have a happy Eid. Eid is a time for us to be happy. And try and find ways in which you can be happy with your family, inshallah. All the quizzes which we've offered in the last few weeks, we'll be offering them free, inshallah, for you to do with your family and friends over these coming days. So you can just go onto Kahoot and open up a chat amongst your friends and do a nice quiz around the Quran. And inshallah, that will enliven the family as well. And of course, make sure you contact your relatives, make sure you call them on the phone, and try and rejoice in this time of happiness, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. Please remember some of your du'as and Eid Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.